Be part of a worldwide community of over 100,000 people and enjoy exclusive benefits while protecting the activities we love. RYA membership, your route to expert advice. Become a member today. You're listening to the RYA 150 podcast, hosted by record-breaking British yachtswoman Dee Caffari, marking 150 years of sailing heritage and future inspiration.
Well, I'm excited to be joined by maritime historian Dougal Henshall, and he has literally gone through the whole 150 years of the RYA, talking about the people, the places, and the monumental moments that have shaped the RYA that we know today. Now, Dougal, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Maritime historian sounds very grand. Like, how much of the maritime era do you look at?
Normally, I'm a dinghy historian. My speciality is the domestic dinghy development timeline. Sounds a bit of a mouthful, but it's a story all by itself. But really, if you look at that, it also tells the story of the RYA, because you're looking at how we went from being the YRA pre-war and then into the RYA and everything that's happened since.
So what kind of instigated this interest and passion you have for maritime history?
Well, I was very lucky. An accident of birth, you could almost say. I was born halfway between Hamble River Sailing Club and Western Sailing Club. So at Hamble River you had Merlins, National 12s. Western you had Hornets, 5.0s. So depending which way I walked in the morning, I could see all these incredible boats. And they say snooker's a sign of a misspent youth. Well, I don't know what it says about sailing being a sign of a misspent youth, but I've since I was 14, I've been in small boats, racing dinghies, and then cats, multi-hulls, big boats. But my focus was always on the very best of the dinghies, and I felt that when I took early retirement, it was a way of giving something back.
And the focus now, celebrating 150 years, how did they come to you and say, can you look into this? Or did you offer?
No. I've worked with the RYA for a long time now, mainly at the dinghy show. So I think I've done 12 of the last 14 dinghy shows, doing a dinghy history. They always have a dinghy history topic, and I've always been the man that they've gone to. So I've covered Jack Holt and Ian Proctor, the Mirror Dinghy, the PY system, all these things. So I guess when you want somebody to look at your history, I had to be in the mix.
You were primed and ready.
Yeah, primed and ready. But the interesting thing is when they came to me and said, first of all, they wanted me to look at the research. And that was always going to be a little bit of an issue, because it's like trying to research a fog bank. Where do you start?
Well, talking of where do you start, 150 years ago, where did the RYA that we know today start? Tell us about the beginning.
Well, that's the story. As I had struggled a little bit to get this across, the story doesn't start with the birth of the YRA. It starts a long way before then, when you could almost go back to the Industrial Revolution, when you started to get industrialists who were big people in society, but you could argue that they didn't have the breeding to ride a horse, so they took to yachting. And because they had the money, but they had the desire to win, they started playing the racing game from a very early. And the rules just weren't there to accommodate this. So a yacht race started with you at anchor, sometimes without even your sails up. So you had to put your sails up, haul up the anchor, and then you started.
Like a bit of a Le Mans start.
But then the boats that you were sailing in were measured in tonnage, which is an indication of how many casks of wine you might be able to carry. And very quickly, different clubs had different rules. They sailed under different rules. Their boats were different. So you couldn't really sail together. So the plan was, let's bring everybody together. No, they didn't want that. And the clubs were really quite anti. And it's easy to forget that maybe the Royal Thames and the Yacht Squadron and Royal Victoria, the Solent, was only a small part of a much bigger story. On the Mersey, for instance, the Royal Mersey, they were way ahead in some ways. They actually let women sail, you might be surprised to know.
Well, it's interesting because, as you say, and as you indicate there, there's a perception that sailing's very south coast based and everything evolves around clubs on the south coast. But I believe your history proves otherwise, and you've indicated that now with the Royal Mersey.
Absolutely, yeah, and the whole point was that they tried to get what they called a conference of club chairmen, a confederation of club chairmen, and the idea that the commodores would all come together. But that fell by the wayside. But as sailing developed, and it was developing very quickly, the need for a concise set of rules and a single form of racing just got more and more. And in the end, the RYA or the YRA was created. But even then, there were a lot of people who were dead against it, to the point that one of the top boats was actually called Nora, which is no YRA.
Oh, I didn't expect you to spell it like that then at all. So there was a bit of a pushback.
No, a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
And it took a long time for this to really coalesce into a body that was capable of showing that it could do good. And it did that by managing the rating and also changing the shape of the boats, because at the time you're getting boats like the Una, which was a plank on edge. This is a 50-foot long yacht with the beam of a wayfarer. And it must have been an interesting task sailing it. Huge, great big deep keel, big rig, because that's how the rules let you do it then.
Mind you, even today we design around the rules and try and push the limits a lot.
But I think we're a lot more cognizant now of, you've got to make boats that are not just a death trap on water. Although, some might argue that the latest rules for the AC are going the other way, where you've got a boat that is only capable of doing a one-trick pony.
Yeah, a rating bandit.
A rating bandit. And after the loss of the Una, they started to change the rules to make boats that look more like the yachts that would go into the new century with.
So over the span of a 150-year period, what are the significant moments that you think have helped shape sailing that we know today?
Well, the first one is just the birth of the YRA, bearing in mind that it was an unwanted child at one point. But, the key moments, I think most likely the loss of the Valkyrie, which was the Earl of Dunraven's boat. And she was sunk in a port and starboard incident. And at the time, the guy who was on port was almost could get away with it, because all Dunraven could claim was like his commercial losses. And it went right the way to the High Court, through the High Court to the Court of Appeal. And it was then decided that if you're in a yacht race, you are in a contract. So the YRA guided us down this path, and this is typical YRA. They don't make decisions, they guide. and this is where they've been so successful. They steer a middle course, and out of that came the need where everybody would be insured for racing risks. And that's a key thing. And then I guess the other fundamental change was after the First World War, because up until then, the YRA had said a complete no-no to small boats, dinghies. And there was a separate association, the BRA, the BRA, Boat Racing Association. When the two came together, bringing dinghies into the YRA, that's when it really started to happen. You got the 14 and all the development that has taken place since. So those would be, for me, the two key moments. Insurance, because that's important, and then bringing dinghies into the fold, because then it's not just something for the rich and powerful. The RYA was a body for everybody.
Yeah, and that's so important in what, if you listen to the dialogue and the narrative now, we're trying to really encourage that sailing's for everyone. Make
Absolutely.
it more accessible, more inclusive.
And when you think that up until 1922, they didn't even want to know dinghies. So it's been such a big change. And just 5 years later, you've got the International 14 and the Prince of Wales Trophy, the Prince of Wales Cup. So, that really started the firing gun. Dinghies were in the Olympics by then, the International 12, which came from the Mersey area. Dinghies were taking a bigger and bigger part because they were there, you could say for everybody, not really for everybody at that point, because dear old Jack Holt back in the 1930s was barred access to a yacht club because he was a boat builder, therefore he wasn't a gentleman. So there was a lot of change to come, and that really came, and I think the RYA's greatest strength was how they managed the post-war era, the 1948 Olympics, the birth of the Firefly, Fairy Firefly, which was the YRA national 12-foot dinghy. And then, if you look at the YRA CV, the shotgun marriage that made the Merlin rocket, like I say, they didn't say, this is what you're going to do. They suggested this would be a good course to steer.
Encourage a nudge in the right direction.
And isn't that, we're remarkably unlegislated for here in this country. You don't have to have a number on the bow, as you do in a lot of other countries. You're not mandated to doing this. The RYA's approach has always been guidance and education as a way forward.
So your knowledge is clearly very vast, but have there been any surprises when you took on, okay, let's look in detail at 150 years? What kind of really surprised you that you weren't aware of before, that you were like, wow?
I think the biggest issue that I faced was simply how to do it, because you don't want surprises. So you couldn't look at the RYS, you couldn't do it 150 years, nor could you do it as 150 separate items, which is one of the suggestions that was being floated. So I divvied it up into 6 eras, which are basically generational. And how much those 6 eras have, really, they are generational. So if you look at 1950 to 1975, the golden era. This is the baby boomer era. And from that, you get the 1975 to 2000, which gives you Shirley Robertson and Ben Ainsley and John Merricks and all these people, Ian Pennell, all these fantastic people. And so it's generational. And how much each generation has carved a bit of the RYA for itself.
Yeah, and the reach of the RYA, because we're internationally recognised, but has your research kind of allowed you to compare how we sit against member national authorities in other countries?
Well, I sail a bit abroad, so I do see, particularly with things like the FFV in France. But what people forget is that in 150 years, we've gone from the YRA to the RYA.
Talk to me about that just quickly, because you keep mentioning the different letters,
Yeah,
so that'd
I'll
be
come
quite
back
good.
to that, because if you go back, so that's 150 years, one change. So if you go back to 1905, which is only 120 years ago, the idea that we should do this internationally, and they created the IYRU. Now, the IYRU was more or less a straightforward clone of the YRA. They just copied it. And, but it's gone IYRU, it's gone ISAF, it's now World Sailing. And of course, as you've got the rise of sailing nations, it's become fully international. But their core raison d'etre comes from being a clone of the RYA all those years ago. But again, if you asked about the change from YRA to RYA. YRA was Yacht Racing Association. It came from when gentlemen sailed yachts. But by the time you get to the end of the Second World War, and all these dinghies sprouting up, it was clear that it wasn't just about yachting, it was about so much more. So they changed the name from the Yacht Racing Association to the Royal Yachting Association. Royal because we've always had a royal there or about. I think we've had 11 chairmen and 11 presidents, and nearly all of those, with one exception, have been royals. Current one, of course, being Princess Anne.
And it's quite funny for that to be the case when you talk about sailing being quite a gentleman's sport, and heaven forbid a woman should be involved.
Well, when you go back to that, to some of these early Olympics, the UK had a very good medal prospect in the Dragons. God forbid that it would have a lady helm. And she was just told, basically, you're not welcome. And the crew were told, you can sail in the Olympics, but you've got to get yourself another helmsman. A helmsman. So they did the right thing and they didn't sail at all. They got another team in and we didn't get a medal. But again, the difference, the Royal Victoria ride on the Isle of Wight was created so that Queen Victoria could be a member of a yacht club and not get blackballed for being a woman. But up at the Royal Mersey, they were letting women in already. Just goes to show the different approach.
Yeah, and that transition of suddenly being open to women on a competitive scale, when did that take place?
I mean, it's always been there. Believe it or not, it really has. You've always had ladies sailing, right back into the early days. I mean, if you go back to the early days of dinghy sailing, ladies sailed up on the Thames, but they had to wear a hat with a gauze thing, so they couldn't, it must have been lovely if you capsized. But ladies have always sailed. But bringing them in from a minor fringe to mainstream, really, I think you've got to look at the likes of, Marie-Claude Ferrou, the French lady, won the Moth Worlds. And then there was an American lady won the Fireballs. And then we had people like Kathy Foster, and Kathy with crew Pete Newlands. They sailed in the Olympics with Kathy as the helm. And, these are the real trailblazers. And, didn't they do well? And, ladies sailing should put them on a pedestal in Trafalgar Square, I think.
Nice. And I mean, it seems crazy, isn't it, that it's such hard work, but and you realise how much has changed.
Yeah, and I mean, I was asked just last week about the changes I've seen in 60 years. And you look at disabled sailing, you would never have included that before. That was not ladies, and just the way that it has become accessible to everybody. It's the ultimate Jack Holt fantasy that sailing should be for all.
RYA courses and qualifications. From beginners to professionals, with more than 100 courses to choose from, there's something for everyone. Visit rya.org.uk to learn more.
But you say that, but the perception still in many towns with people is that it's for the elite, it's expensive, it's inaccessible.
Yep.
So what are we doing wrong?
I don't think you can lay that at the door of the RYA. I think you can lay that at the door of society, and there you've got the difference. The RYA doesn't try and bend society. Society tries to bend the RYA, but the RYA reflect what is happening in society, and you've only got to go to the youth nationals, or go to the 505 Europeans and see the 505 Europeans being won by a lady helm, to realise that actually, the RYA could never dictate; it can only steer.
And as a historian, I don't know if you do this, but if you were to predict the future, because you always look backwards, but if you're to change your mindset and look forwards, what the next 150 years could look like?
I think you've got a situation whereby the future, the uncertainty behind the future is going to be an issue, because we've got climate change for a start, rising sea levels, you've got political instability. Can we still just put our boats on the back? I mean, before Brexit, you could pop backwards and forwards and do the French nationals or whatever. It's not so easy. I'm not saying it's a good or a bad thing, but I'm just saying it's changed. So you've got societal change coming. AI, the digital world, people's lives are changing. Will they have time to go around doing 3 or 4 day events or week-long events? So I think the great thing, and then of course you look at the Olympics, if that's going to be the pinnacle, whereas before you'd have the UK success in the Flying Dutchman, the UK success in the Finn, UK gold medals in the Tornado class. Now it's going to be wing foil and kite sailing and all this, and you could end up with a situation whereby you might end up with just like the laser and the 49er in the Olympics, and nothing for sailors of a normal size. So I wouldn't like to try and predict anything other than it's going to be very different.
Yeah.
And if you are a kite sailor or a windsurfer, take windsurfing. Great example of how the RYA successfully navigated a huge change. When windsurfing came out, God, you'd go and buy a do-for wing, but you didn't need a sailing club, you didn't need a boat space, you didn't need to do duties. If the weather wasn't right, you didn't go, you stayed at home and got brownie points. If the weather was right, you just stuck it on the roof of your Golf, VW Golf, and went to the beach, windsurfed for a couple of hours, came home and you'd scratch the itch. It was the antithesis of the old yacht club model. And yacht clubs had to manage their way through that with backing of the RYA, and we can now see how successfully they did it. When you think of how long some of the inquiries we have running now in the UK are dragging on for. As soon as the Fastnet, it was clear what had happened. The RYA had their inquiry, and in very short order, they had a whole list of things to implement that put offshore sailing on pretty much on the stable and sustainable path that it's on today.
Yeah, and an indication of the depth and breadth of our sport that they manage.
Absolutely, and the Fastnet has to be one of those seminal moments for the RYA, because they got it right, and then after that you see a much greater emphasis on training, Yachtmaster, the coaching, the books, even down to the VHF certificates. You think back, you're too young to remember the early VHF sets, but they weren't very good. Now you can just go down to Force 4, you can buy a set and you can use it. You don't, but the RYA will teach you, well, they won't, they will show you to a school that will teach you, and then the RYA will license you, and when they license you, they know that you can do it properly. So that's, again, it's not saying you must do this, they're saying it's better if you do it like that. It's the strength.
Yeah, and if you were to take all the elements, because it's very clear that what they do is immense, what makes the RYA special?
Well, first of all, what is the RYA? We know what it does. Everybody knows what the RYA does. And then you think, well, do we? I would suggest that for 90% of the sailing population, the RYA is there in the background. Now, if you need a certificate for a dinghy or a rating, or you've been involved with a protest that's gone wrong, or something's happened, then you might beat your path to the RYA's door. But if you want to do a course, something like that. But for the rest of the time, you get on and sail, and the RYA is there at your shoulder, but they don't actually influence what you do, except the influence is all pervasive. We do what we do today, how we do it, because the RYA has steered you on that course. And we're very lucky, because otherwise, as we said earlier, we could find ourselves far more restricted than we are now. But if you want an example of that, the 2003 Watercraft Act, which everybody thought was going to be aimed at jet skis, yes, you can get antisocial behaviour there. But the Act, the RYA had a major input to the Act. And again, it was steering the middle path rather than taking a big stick to a problem that may or may not have been there. So whoever was behind the RYA backing for that, full marks to them.
And the challenge that you see in the near future for them to keep getting all the decisions right, where does that sit? We know there's the people that lead the organisation, but there's a board behind them that they have to answer to. But it's a minefield ahead of them.
Keeping the RYA on that middle, non-legalistic path is going to be increasingly difficult going forward. And that the board of the RYA, the council of the RYA, they will have their work cut out keeping the RYA relevant and in people's vision and in their minds, and at the same time keeping us safe, because that's what they've done. They've kept us safe for so many years, 150 years they've kept us safe.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more years to come, and you've got a lot more history to keep going on, so that in a few years' time we ask you again, you got another chapter.
Well, when you think it's next year's the 80th anniversary of the Merlin rocket. Coming up, we've got the 100th anniversary, the centenary of the International 14, the centenary of the Moth, the Firefly, which would be 80 years of the Firefly. Yeah, all these things, they are, we think of sailing as being rapidly evolving. And people say there's too many new classes and it's split the fleet and it's taken us away from one design, saying all this. But at the same time, there can't be many sports where you're sailing effectively the same boat as your grandparents would have been sailing back in 1949, 90, at the time when the YRA became the RYA. And certainly in the Fireflies, people do uphold wooden Fireflies and they sell them successfully. That's an incredibly consistent story.
Yeah,
Very few sports are like that.
And a really nice legacy of our sport.
Well, I think the other thing, if you're going to talk legacy, you can't not talk about the Academy at Portland, because we had the Olympics. Now, when in the days when we were bidding for the Olympics, and they said there will be an academy at Portland. It's not Weymouth, it's Portland. And you see so much about how all that Olympic money went into places that didn't leave a legacy, and yet the RYA have guided Portland, worked with Portland, and now Portland has got to be one of the best legacies of 2012 that you could find of any Olympics. Because I tell you what, you talk about other countries. I've been to other countries' Olympic Centre, and they're not a patch on Weymouth.
But you're not biased in the slightest.
No, that's not being biased. That's just telling. And when you go to a certain nation you go to their Olympic Centre and there's no seats on the loo, you think, actually, Weymouth? I'll go to Weymouth. Yes.
I think that's a really nice way to end. 150 years, a legacy, and I think there's a lot more maritime history for you to study.
150 years of steering a stable course, and it may not be to everybody's wish. People would have rather they were more radical or less radical, but they've steered a very much. They haven't hit many marks on the way, have they?
Yeah, all good mark roundings.
All good mark roundings.
Thank you very much for your insight and your time today.
Thank you very much, Dee.
Thanks.
Lovely.
Learning to sail or sharpening your skills? The RYA shop has everything you need, from handbooks and training guides to the latest racing rules of sailing, plus ebooks and audiobooks you can take anywhere. Visit rya.org.uk/shop and set course for your next adventure.